Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 56 of the Build Podcast. And in this episode, we'll be doing AngularJS, which is basically a very fun way to create single page applications, a fully Ajaxified website front end. And you can use this front end application to then communicate with the server side. So let's get started with AngularJS. We will be trying out with version 1.2.6. Now, before we go forward, let me give you a brief intro to the project that we'll be building. So here we have a list of books that I intend to read in the next year. Yep, it is coming to be a new year soon. And I also recommend that you go through some of them, very fundamental books. So what I have done here is if you click this checkbox over here, it will give you basically a quick look, which includes a image of the cover as well as a 1 or 2 liner summary of what the book is about. As you can see, the interface is really snappy and fast. You can of course do 2 book lookups as well. At the same time, you can do a little bit of search using the search bar right here, and as soon as I typed here design, you can see that 3 of the books containing the word design shows up. You can definitely search by the author name as well. Also, over here in the last column, if you notice the quantity, so this is basically the number of books that I will be ordering for the book club. So let's say if it is 2, notice here immediately the entire row color kind of changes to indicate that, hey, you are ordering this book. And after you have kind of confirmed what books you will be ordering, if you click the Get Books right at the bottom, notice that everything else will disappear with the book titles and the quantity being displayed. Now this demo is built totally in the front end, which means we have not connected to the server side. But I believe with the information that I will be sharing in this episode, it will really get you started with building applications, front-end applications with AngularJS. Now, just a bit of info before we get on to building the project. The very first website is definitely angularjs.org, which comes with documentation on AngularJS and really clean, sort of very simple examples to get started with. This is exactly where I started. The other one is the API reference. This is totally like my go-to page whenever I'm developing AngularJS applications. Great, so let's get started with AngularJS. I'm in my desktop in a folder which is completely empty as of now. So I'm going to start with creating a file called index.html. So inside this file, the very first thing I'll do is let's just set a title. Inside the script tag, I will include the AngularJS library. In order to do that, we can just search for Google CDN AngularJS and click on the first link and then AngularJS. And we can basically get this entire link of script tag right here. And I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. As I mentioned, I will be using 1.2.6. Great, so with this happening, why don't I fire up the server, which is using simple Python HTTP server. And let me also start the live reload so that it is always changing upon save. If I open the dev console and I query Angular, it will kind of come up in the prompt, which means to say that I do have Angular available. So the very first thing with Angular is we will have to define the part of the DOM that we want Angular to act upon. And this is basically done by the attribute tag ng-app. Next thing, let's just input a type text and let's bind it to some data and let's call this message. So notice here I'm using another type of attribute called ng-model. Now if we want to display this, let's try to display this in a paragraph, and we will have to use this little curly braces for template, and we will just put in the same name, which is message, coming from the ng model. Let's try this out in the browser. So let me put this up a little bigger, and now when I say hello, notice here it will echo it right here. Now just to make sure that we get what is going on, let me just change this, and if we echo it right here, hi there, yep, it is kind of binding it. So whatever I'm typing inside this input box, it will be outputted to the paragraph right here. And you can basically do the same check by doing an inspect element, and there you go, the ng binding we'll bind it right from the ng model message. So this is a very simple example. Let me just go ahead and create a folder, data binding, as the very first exercise, and I will go and transfer the file here. Alright, so next example, let me create another file, index.html, and I will start off from where we left off, but this time we will create something called the controllers so that we have a little bit of organization to our code. So let me delete away everything and let me start with a div tag, and inside the div tag I will have paragraph with the thing called message once again. This time I will also have ng controller. And let me just call it hello controller. This time this message will be coming from the script or potentially from the server side as well. So let me create it inside the script tag and create something called function with the same name as what we defined here, which is hello control. And we will pass in the scope, and let's just define scope.message equals to hello world. With this, let's turn to the browser, and there you go, it is displaying right here. And if you do a little inspect element, you will see once again that the paragraph has been added with a class which is ng binding, and it is being changed. Once again, just to understand what we are doing, let's change the hello world to just hello. And when we change back, after a little live reload, you'll see that the message is being changed here as well. Great, so let me go ahead and create the second folder called controller, and I'll just copy the file inside here. This time, why don't we go ahead and also add a function? So here, let me add on scope dot say uppercase. So we are just going to have a very simple function which will take in the message, in this case just a word as the argument, and it will simply return word.toUppercase. How can we use this function that we declared here in our DOM? Well, let me create another paragraph and call it uppercase, and this time we will simply pass in the function that we defined in the scope, which is uppercase, and pass in message. Let's go back to the browser and see what's happening. There you go. So here we have the message data, and here we have the uppercase which is acting upon the message. Next up, let us do a little bit of code organization. Firstly, we will have to have a name for our application. So for simplicity, we'll just name it app. So firstly, we will come back right to the ng-app attribute and call that as app. Next up, let's define something. So the first thing we will define is say var app equals to angular.module, and let's pass in the name of the application, which is simply app, and some dependencies. In this case, we are building a very simple application, so we do not have any dependencies. For in future, we can have some dependencies, for example, location or local storage and more. Next, how do we integrate this hello control? Here we can now start defining app.controller. And this is exactly where we will pass in the hello control name. And as the second argument, we will pass in function, and inside here we will pass in the scope. And this is exactly the same as we defined before. So I'm just going to cut and paste it right here. And I will just delete away the previous one. Now imagine like this, we can define a lot of controllers, and this can potentially be found in individual files. For example, we have a hello controller which might be found in say hello controller.js file, and you will have to reference it right here. So as you notice, the application or the function will be very similar to like what we did before, but our code is a lot more organized here. Let's go back to the browser here. Yep, it still looks the same. So once again, let me go ahead and create a new folder, and I'll just copy this file with the app.module and app.controller here. Alright, so let's continue. This time we will talk about something called filters, which is really powerful in AngularJS. Now instead of having a function here, what if we can apply a filter? Now for syntactical purpose, the filter will appear simply like this. You will use the pipe symbol and say uppercase. Why don't we build the filter this time? So over here, instead of the function, I will delete it away, and instead I will build a filter. So for that, it will be app.filter. Let's give it a name. It will be called uppercase, and I will pass in function and then word, and it will be really similar to what we previously defined in the function, which will be word.toUppercase, and then return it. So as you notice here, instead of a function, I will pass in the pipe symbol and then the filter name that I defined it right here. And if I go back to my browser, oops, something is wrong. Why don't I open up the console? So looks like I have a little error upon building the custom filter. So why don't we check out the documentation in Angular? So this is exactly what I do when I come across errors. If you notice here from the console, you can even click here and it will open up an AngularJS website with a little more information about our error. Nevertheless, let's look at the documentation with the proper syntax. So looks like my second argument is having a little error. So let's go ahead and edit it. So over here, I'm supposed to pass in an anonymous function, and then I'm supposed to return another function. Alright, so hopefully this now works. So when I go back to my browser and refresh it, and there you go, it is working. And this time, instead of a function, I am using a custom made filter. Now AngularJS interestingly comes with a lot of inbuilt filters. So let's explore some of them. The very first one is currency. As you can see from the documentation, there are various ways of using the currency. So let's explore some very simple ways. So in our paragraph tag, why don't we say price? And here we will pass in the price. And let's put in a filter called currency. And here I will pass in, say, euro currency. And over here in scope, I will say price. And let's pass in some decimals here. And now when I go back, notice here, it is saying EUR. And of course, I am missing a little space here. So in the currency, I will put a little space EUR. And yep, the space is right there. Why don't we explore another filter which will be commonly used, and that is the date filter. So let me go ahead and copy another paragraph, and instead of the price, I will say date. Let's create a data called starting time. And in the filter, I will say date, and let's pass in the inbuilt format, which is medium. So let me create another scope variable, scope.startingtime, and as simply, we will just put it as date now. And there you go, it's showing the current date with a little bit of formatting. And of course, the filter for date will give us more information on how we can customize this further. So really interesting filters, do go ahead and use them. Price and date being very commonly used for many applications. Next, let's explore something called the repeated items, or ng repeat. So let's say you have a lot of repeated items. We can actually display them in AngularJS through a loop. So let me completely delete away all of this, and let me instead have something called the book controller. I will keep the ng Angular module as app, but let me delete away the rest of them, and let me create a new controller and call it the books controller. I should definitely give it a plural name, books, and inside the function, the first argument will definitely be the scope. And inside here, let me define an array of books. And each of the array item will actually be an object. And each of the object will have keys such as name and the author, which typically a book will have. Now, instead of only one book, why don't I cut and paste lots of books? There you go. Now, if we wanted to display all these books, there are, I believe, 8 in total. How can we do so? Let's go back to the DOM, and this time let's create an ordered list, and inside the ordered list there will be list items that will be repeated. In this case, in Angular, we can use this attribute called ngRepeat, and let's call it book in books. Now this books must match the scope that you defined here, which is books. And typically we will give a singular name to say that book, which is each of the items in books. So now we can refer to them. So under the strong tag, let me just call out book.name, book.name. And how do I know whether it is name? Well, the .name is coming from the key right here. And let me just say by, and then similarly I'll say book.author, and author is another key which is coming from the information right here. And that's it. Why don't we go back to the browser, and there you go. All the books and their authors are being displayed here. If we go and inspect element, which is always a very helpful thing to do, we will notice that there you go, the li, and each of the li is being repeated. Why don't we also add a little filter here, which is very, very helpful. So here I will put in an input text, and let me give it ng model and call it search books. And over here in the li, I will also add in a filter. This is just to say that it will basically act upon the search books. Let's see how this turns out to be. So we have a little search box here, and let's go ahead and search for design. So all the books with the design word inside it will get filtered. We can also search for the author, and as you notice, it is really snappy here, and this comes in really helpful along with ng repeats. Next, let's go on and display a little bit more about these books, but we will only display them if the user wants them to. Now, the very first thing I will do is add a little bit more information to these books right here. So along with name and author, I will add on summary, which will include a couple of sentences as well as the cover. So let me go ahead and replace it. And there you go. Each of the book is now having additional information. Of course, now if we go back to the browser, nothing will happen because we are not calling out book.summary and book.cover. Next, let's change this layout from a simple ordered list to table. Let me first add in a little placeholder here and say search for books, and add a little horizontal line. And the very first thing I'll do here under table is let me add a little bit of border and cell padding. And inside, in the very first line, let's have some title here. So the very first thing will be index. The next one will be book details. And after this, we will typically want to repeat it. So tr, and inside here, let's have ng-repeat, which is really simple to as what we defined here. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. And let me just delete away the ordered list. All right, so the very first column, we will have something called the index, which comes in very handy, which will basically be the incremental number. Next, we will similarly go on to define the book name. So maybe under the strong tag, book.name by book.author. Now over here, we will do something a little bit different. So let's add in a div here. And inside the div, we will add in a paragraph, which will basically be the book.summary. And after this, we will also add in an image with the source book.cover, and the alt text can simply be book.name again. Now, if we come back here, you will notice that it is quite a little bit of text, and we do want this summary and image to appear only if selected by the user. So let's do some changes. Firstly, if you notice here, the index is appearing from 0. We want it to appear from 1. So let's come back to index right here and add +1. And yes, you can do simple calculations here. And yep, the index is starting from 1. Next up, I will paste in an image folder, which will basically consist of all the images. So when I come back to the browser, yep, all the images are now there. Lastly, I will come back here and create a little checkbox. Input type equals to checkbox. And here, let me put a ng model equals to and call it selected. And over here, the div that you see, this will only be displayed if the selected is chosen. In this case, we will write it in an attribute called ngIf and call it selected. Now notice what happens here when I go back. it appears really neat, and only when I choose this checkbox, then the entire information about the summary and the picture comes in. So let me show you in slightly smaller font. So there you go, it's really snappy. You can add in and view some info at the same time for several of the books. And at the same time, you can also go ahead and search right here. So let's say if you add in design and then you search here, notice how this summary and the picture is still appearing. It's all really snappy. Next up, why don't we add a column over here where the user is able to choose the quantity, and if it is above 0, which means 1, 2 or any other number, this entire row color will change. So firstly, let me go ahead and add a third column, and let's call it quantity. I will also come back here and add a third column, and inside here select, and inside the select let's give it another model, and we will simply call this book.quantity. And inside here we will have say 4 of them. We will start with 0, 1, 2 and 3. Let's see how it looks in the browser. So there you go, you are able to choose, and obviously nothing is happening as of now. So upon choosing, we do want the entire row color to change. So firstly, let me go back and define the style. So let's say style, and it will be a class. Let's call this class selected, and it will basically be a background color of say wheat. Now let me come back to the row where we want the color to change, and this will typically be the one with the tag tr. Over here I will add in an Angular attribute called ngClass. So inside here within the curly brackets I'll put here selected, which is the class we want to apply, and then let's give it an expression. So we will only apply it if book.quantity is actually more than 0. Why don't we try it out? So over here now when I choose 2, oops, it is not applying. That's because I have a little spelling mistake here, quantity. So let's try it once again, book 1, and there you go, it is applying, which is basically a very quick visual indicator to the user that hey, you have chosen these books. Finally, we do want these items to be kind of stored in our local scope, and upon clicking say get the books, only the chosen books should be shown. So firstly for this, let me come back to the script section, and over here other than the books I will create another variable. So let's say scope.selectedBooks, and initialize it to an empty object. Next, I will create a tiny little button here. Let me first close the table tag, and let me go back to the options once again, and over here we will say ng-change. So whenever the user is changing the values here, we want it to do something. So why don't we create a function? So we will say add books, and then we will pass in each of the book. So why don't we come here and define it? So we'll say scope.addBooks equals to function, and here we are passing in the book. So why don't we say scope.selectedBooks? I should actually give this a plural name. So selected books, and why don't we pass in as a hash? So book.name equals to, and here basically we will just copy only the name, which will be book.name, and we will also pass in the quantity, which will be book.quantity. Now this quantity will actually come in as a string, so why don't we do a little parse int and make it into an integer. And we also have to note that if the quantity is changed back to 0, we should delete it. So why don't we make that check? So if book.quantity is equal to 0, and we will just check with this string because 0 will be a string, we will delete it, scope.selectedBooks, and we would want to delete the same as book.name. Now just to understand what is going on, why don't we basically do the entire scope.selectedBooks here? So every time there is a change, this function will be triggered. Great, so let me come back here in the browser and open up the console. And now when I kind of change it, Notice here, there you go, modern operating system. And if I open up, quantity is 1. Now, if I do quantity 2, there should only be 1 still. Yep, there is still 1. And the quantity is 2 here. Now, let me choose another one. And there you go, 2 are being chosen. And if I open up, modern operating system is 2. And design pattern is 2. And if I change back one of them to 0, notice here it's back to only 1 book, and that is design patterns with 2 of them. Looks like it is working fine. Now, as a final note, we want a button to be here, which will kind of display only the chosen items. Now, before we go on, notice that there was a little error because it cannot find book.cover. Well, that is because we are passing in source src, which is an HTML attribute. We should be using ng-source to kind of tell the Angular that this is a source. So now we do not see an error and everything seems to be working fine. Finally, let's add a button here and dispatch the books. So I'm gonna come right at the bottom here and create a button, get the books. And over here, upon clicking it, we can actually trigger some action. So to do that, we have this thing called ng-click. And why don't we say get books, which is a function. Great. So before we do that, I am going to create a new variable and call it dispatch. So scope.dispatched. Let's call it false because initially any user will have it as false. Now upon calling getBooks, so let's have scope.getBooks, we will simply set the scope.dispatched to actually say true. Why don't we also add in an ordered list of all the books that are only dispatched? So to do that, I will once again do an li with an ng-repeat equals to, this time it will be book in selected books. And once again, under the strong tag, I can add in book.name, and inside square brackets we can add in book.quantity. Let's try it out. So once we choose, notice here immediately the selected items will be here. Notice what happens to the square bracket, the numbers here. When I choose 3, it will be immediately updated. Let's add one more and then maybe 3 of them, another one, another one. And notice here if I change something to 0, it should go away, and yep, it did. Now wouldn't it be nice when I click get the books, all these will disappear and it will only appear this one. For this, we will use something called ng-hide and ng-show. And we can very usefully use this scope.dispatched for it. So once it is dispatched, we will basically hide this button. So why don't we say ng-hide equals to simply dispatched. And similarly, we need to hide a couple of other things. We can also hide this entire table where we are choosing all the books. We can also hide the search box. We can also hide this HR, the horizontal line. Why don't we try it out? So let's say I'm choosing 3 of this and 2 of this book. Let's say get books. And there you go. It is basically hiding them. But notice here, once I'm choosing something, this is actually appearing. This is a redundant information which we probably do not want it to appear. So for this, we can simply do ng-show. So this will only show if it is being dispatched. Great, let's try it out. So I'll choose 3 of this, maybe 2 of this, and 1 of this. Get books. Oops, I had a little error. It should be inside inverted comma. Let's try it out one last time. So 3 of this, 1 of this, 2 of this, get the books, and yep, only these 3 are being displayed and the rest is hidden. So that was a little project that we built. I hope it gave us a lot of introduction to the various attributes used in AngularJS, whether it's ng-class, ng-source for image tags, ng-hide, show, repeats, filters, controllers, and much, much more. Now, there are very other exciting things to work on in Angular. I've only scratched the surface. Now, usually in AngularJS, we will couple it up with a server-side program. Either it is Rails or say Sinatra for Ruby, or even Python using Django or Flask, or even using Node.js. Now, usually we will use this library called HTTP with AngularJS if we have some simple server-side interaction to do. Over here, you can explain or declare the method, which can be get, put, post, or delete, and with the URL that goes back to the server side along with the parameters. But if you are using something RESTful, do make sure to use ng-resource for this. Also, many times we tend to change the URL pattern. For this, location comes in really handy. Next up, I want to share with you the places where I picked up AngularJS from. The very first one is videos by Egghead. This in itself is a fantastic resource. Currently, they have over 80 videos and many of them are free. In fact, most of them are free. Do go through these Egghead videos right from video number 1 to get a very thorough walkthrough on AngularJS. The second one is this book that I went through, which is a book from O'Reilly. It is a recent book released just this year. And thirdly, I also went through AngularJS, building easier JavaScript apps as part of the Tuts Plus screencast course. And finally, as the build link of the episode, I will give it to the Yeoman Monthly Digest. Now, currently it is at digest number 2, but I believe this is really useful for any front-end developer. It comes with Grunt, Yeoman, Ember, or even front-end applications such as Angular, Ember, or Backbone, and it comes with a lot of links for our monthly learning. So do give it a try. It's found under html5rocks.com, and subscribe to Yeoman Monthly Digest. And that's it for this week's episode of Build Podcast. For all other episodes of Build Podcast, do go to build-podcast.com and subscribe via RSS, iTunes, Vimeo, YouTube, GitHub, or Twitter. And I'll see you in the next episode, which will highly likely be next year. Have a great year ahead. Goodbye.